Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamerZ.com video we have news that AMD are going to be forming a partnership with Electronic Arts. That means that certain games, specifically those using the Frostbite 3 engine, are going to be optimized exclusively for AMD-based systems. So that means that new titles are going to be released, for example, Mirror's Edge 2, Battlefield 4 and so forth, are going to be optimized exclusively for the GPUs as well as CPUs. So what does that mean if you do not own an AMD graphics card? Just for example, well, that means that you're going to have to wait for driver optimizations. Basically, NVIDIA will have to release the optimizations for the driver after the game has been released, and then you'll see specific updates for your driver, for your graphics card. So for example, let's assume that a week later on, after the game's launched, NVIDIA have figured out how to optimize the game better for their graphics cards. They will release a driver, therefore performance on the game will then go up. This isn't really new. Both companies have been vying for these exclusive deals for a while now. However, recently AMD have been doing fairly well. They've managed to snag titles such as Crysis 3 and Tomb Raider, which are of course very big titles. Now remember, AMD are being used to power the PlayStation 4 as well as the Xbox One and even Nintendo's Wii U. So that means that, to be very blunt, AMD are doing extremely well in terms of the games right now. Back in the day, apparently, NVIDIA passed up the opportunity to be powering the next generation consoles with its graphics card systems. So just how much of a big deal is that if you do not own an NVIDIA graphics card, if you do own AMD? That just simply means that you are going to get better performance out of the gate. Now obviously if you own a much better graphics card than someone who has an AMD card, so for example, let's say you own a GTX 680 and they were to own, for example, a Radeon 7790, then you're going to definitely still have an advantage over them. But if you have a comparable card, then that's where you're going to have trouble. It's worth noting that some of the driver revisions that have been released on cards can be quite big in terms of the performance difference. 10 or 20% is certainly not uncommon. However, 30 or even 40% plus are certainly not unheard of. In particular, Tomb Raider, the Tres FX was extremely demanding even on AMD systems. However, NVIDIA cards, it really utterly destroyed them. However, a series of updates were released, and I believe it was something around 40 to 43%, but don't quote me on that. It was certainly significant, and you can go ahead and you can Google that, and you can see the differences in what has happened when they've released driver cards. That also means that for review purposes, if you're going to be seeing a title that is reviewed that obviously has been optimized very well for AMD cards, it is also not going to bode well for reviews for NVIDIA until the drivers have been updated. That's why a lot of hardware review sites often do updated reviews if, say, a driver has been released that shows much better performance in a game after the manufacturer has had time to optimize it some. Anyway, nothing particularly major to worry about if you are a NVIDIA owner, such as myself. It's just one of those things that you're going to have to wait a week or two. Fortunately, NVIDIA are relatively quick with their driver updates. However, gone are the days where NVIDIA had a huge dominant role in the market. Now AMD are definitely fighting back. So what does it mean for CPUs? Well, that's a bit of a tricky one. Previously, game manufacturers have, of course, always preferred Intel, simply because of, well, much better performance on a single thread. Now, however, the momentum is starting to shift. As you guys are most likely aware, the AMD Jaguar powers the next generation consoles, specifically the Xbox and the PlayStation. And of course, that means that we actually have 8 hardware threads, so that likely means that CPUs that are 4 or more cores are going to become a lot more prevalent in the PC marketplace, at least for gaming, because right now we are at a point where, to be honest with you, tri-cores to quad-cores are more than enough for most games, and of course we're not going past the 32-bit titles anyway for most games. Not all, of course. Some do support 64-bit, which in other words means that they can address more than 4 gigs of RAM. However, certain titles have been breaking the mold of much better performance on Intel, and certain titles such as, let's say, Crysis 3 have been performing actually quite damn well on AMD. Now, that's not to say they've been beating Intel. However, that is to say that AMD are now becoming a lot more competitive, which is a very good thing in my personal opinion, because it helps to drive down the processor prices, because one of the issues with prices right now in the PC marketplace is simple. AMD have not been competitive, therefore they've been seen as the cheaper alternative, but not really the high performance alternative. However, AMD are gaining a little bit of ground, and of course they have a new CPU architecture that is going to be rolled out, if you excuse the pun, by the end of this year, at least at some point. We're not exactly sure when. Of course, they have just released a 5 GHz CPU, or at least it turbos up to 5 GHz, but that really means bupkis, because currently we know for 100% certainty that you can actually overclock an AMD CPU, and in most games it still will not be able to keep up with the Intel equivalent. However, if Electronic Arts and any of the titles that are going to be using Frostbite are optimized heavily, it's likely they're going to be optimized for multi-CPU types of PCs. So obviously, long term, we'll have to see how this actually impacts the game marketplace. For right now, I think we should really concentrate on the GPU side of things, since CPUs aren't really that big of a deal, at least at this particular stage, because AMD have too much of a discrepancy. But I think the next generation of CPUs, assuming they can do a decent jump in performance, say 10 to 20%, they're going to have a lot of competition in the hands, and I of course talk about Intel. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this particular video, so hopefully you've enjoyed it, and if you guys can subscribe to the channel, I will see you soon. Regardless, take care and bye for now.